Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to IOB's Regulatory Insight session. My name is Evelyn Cregan, and I am the Director of Compliance and Governance Education with the IOB. And I'm delighted to welcome my guest here today, Garrett O'Neill. Garrett, you're very welcome.
Evelyn.
So, Garrett is the Head of Consultation in the Private and Financial Sector in the Data Protection Commission. He's an experienced Assistant Commissioner, a solicitor by training, and has worked extensively in the public and the private sector. Skilled in advising all areas around data protection compliance across insurance, banking, as I said, public and private sector, retail and telecommunications. And Gareth also sits on the Financial Matters Working Group with the European Data Protection Board. So Gareth, you're very welcome, but I've given the more sort of formal and maybe stilted introduction to you, but I'm sure our listeners will be really interested to hear about your background, how you've arrived at your current role. So maybe tell us a little bit about your career to date before we get into talking maybe some other matters data protection related.
I'm a solicitor, so I worked in private practice for a number of years before I joined the civil service through the Director of Corporate Enforcement's office. So I did that over 20 years ago, and I used to prosecute white collar crimes under the Companies Acts. So and directors of companies that basically failed to comply with Companies Acts. So I did a lot of work in the high courts and a lot of prosecution work, criminal prosecutions in the district court. So I have a lot of experience in that litigation in that regard. I moved then to a fundamental rights agency called the Equality Authority that dealt with discrimination laws. So I did a lot of civil work on behalf of claimants who had issues with their employer or service providers about discrimination under any one of 9 grounds: disability, gender, age, all those type of things. So I worked there for a number of years, and that was closed down. And then I was moved on to data protection, which is another fundamental rights agency. And in this regard, I'm actually doing policy work and compliance work, which is more or less full circle. I'm not doing any enforcement work anymore, which is, I find that the policy and compliance work is actually more satisfactory. It's actually more beneficial that basically just stop something before it happens. And it's something that I find very fulfilling, that basically when we can advise organizations to prevent things rather than and assist them in doing things right, rather than ending up with the ultimate consequence of being in a court scenario. So the work is actually very fulfilling and very interesting, and it's quite a good job to have at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And it's really interesting to see your sort of, your full 360 view of, starting out, obviously all very consumer focused and individual focused, but I suppose when you've done that much work on the enforcement side, it really helps, I suppose, inform what the policy side needs to be. Yeah, no, definitely get that. So just to position this, I suppose, for our listeners, many of whom will be very familiar, but for those that maybe aren't, let's just maybe position like the Data Protection Commission, and obviously its importance here in Ireland and across Europe, its purpose and its strategy. So just tell us a little bit about the DPC, the office of the DPC, what's its purpose, when it was established, and maybe some of the big changes that we've seen in the last decade in that office.
Yeah, the DPC, I mean, it's been known as DPC since 2018, I think, but I mean, since GDPR came in. But I mean, it's been around since 1988, so it's in existence over 30 years. So, and this law has been in existence over 30 years in Ireland. So it's been longer in Europe, actually. But it's been there for that period of time. So it's not a new thing when GDPR actually came into play in 2018. 2018 was basically an upgrade, basically based on the new technology advances that have occurred. We're no longer paper-based businesses or organizations. We're using computers, we're using new technologies, we're using data centers, we're processing a lot more personal data. So GDPR is there to actually upgrade the safeguards and measures that should be put in place by companies, by organizations when processing this type of data. So the purpose of my office, the Data Protection Commission, the DPC, is to safeguard. Our primary purpose is to safeguard individual rights. So these individual rights are in relation to how their data is processed by any organization, call a data controller or any data processor working on behalf of that organization. So we are there, that is our primary function. So in that regard, we do receive a lot of complaints from the public, from individual people in relation to access requests that when they have sought access of their personal data from a company, from a public sector body, from whatever organization it may be, and that company or organization has failed to deal with it within a 30-day period. So that is the core thing that we deal with on a daily basis, is a right of access request that has been failed to be dealt with by a company. They failed to give the proper information back to that person. It's the right to know is what right of access is. It's the right to know how your data is processed, who's been given to, what third parties have access to it, what it could be used for. Is it a good use? Could it be harmful or detrimental to the person? If it is harmful or detrimental to a person, is there a legal basis for it? So there's a lot of issues going on there. And this is where transparency and privacy notices of companies are very important, that explain prior to actually collecting any information from a person as to what the uses and purpose of that information can be used for. So, that is a primary work of our organization. We deal with fundamental rights of individuals, how they exercise them, and the failure of companies to deal or actually allow those fundamental rights to be exercised in a proper manner. And that's where the complaints section come into play. We also deal with, in an enforcement activity, we deal with breaches, security breaches of data, where basically a company has lost data, or there's been an unauthorized access to it, it's been stolen, there's been a security breach, a data breach of some sort, and they had to mandatory report that to us, and they have to do a rectification process for that breach and inform their customers and anybody that could be affected by the breach to take measures to safeguard themselves. So that's another issue that we deal with on an enforcement basis. And other enforcement issues we deal with are basically non-compliance with the GDPR itself. We're basically posting it's been found to have an unlawful basis or not a proper legal basis, or some of the Article 5 principles are not being done correctly, proportionality, necessity, data minimization, data accuracy, stuff like that. So we would investigate those matters, and we would engage with, through a complaint process. We could get it through a protected disclosure under the protected disclosure legislation. We could get it from a group that basically, one of the privacy advocacy groups that may actually inform us that they want the issues looked into. So, or we can actually get it through a complaint process ourselves from the individual saying that I believe there is something wrong here, and I have evidence to show, to prove that, basically to substantiate these allegations, and I need you as an organization to look into it on a known volition inquiry, which we would do. So, so that's a lot of, that's in a nutshell what we do. The last thing I would say is that on my part is I do supervision or consultation or compliance work, which basically is an overview of all what I've just said there. Like, I'm trying to stop or help and assist organizations to get better compliance, do things better, do things in a way that's going to be compliant with the law, and that basically can safely manage the processing of personal data within your organization and externally in a good manner, that basically has best practices put in place and procedures and policies. So I'm there to assist in what is quite a difficult piece of legislation. It's not a straightforward piece of legislation at all, because it intertwines with a lot of other different laws. So that's where it is quite confusing sometimes, how it intertwines with these laws. So
we're going to touch on one or two areas, I think, in a while in relation to that. No, that's really, really interesting. And I suppose, I think as well, which maybe you didn't draw out completely, but the communications through the office have really raised the profile of data and data protection, because certainly, back prior to, I suppose, the introduction or the pre-introduction of the GDPR as we know it in May 2018, having studied the old Act at the time, totally familiar with what you're saying in the sense that it was always there. Maybe the fines or the possibility of the fines changed a few things, but it has very much become a household topic now. Everybody understands what GDPR is and data protection, sometimes almost maybe too much, but no, it has been very successful and very successfully rolled out. So before we touch on some of the other things, I just wanted to pick up on something. We met earlier this year on Data Protection Day on the 28th of January. We had over 850 attendees registered to that event, and you kindly gave us some really extensive written feedback that we shared out with those members in relation to questions that they posed at the time. And we really appreciated that, so thank you, because I know there was a lot of effort on your part. The areas that sort of were raised at the time of concerns were around, inaccurate credit records and the central credit register, failure to do proper data protection requirements when collecting and processing data for AML, and we'll probably talk about that a bit more. breach reporting, and also around retention of mortgage and loan applications. I'm just wondering, having gone through that process with us, have you seen any improvements in these areas?
I spoke to the breach section of our office today, and they also deal with the credit register, central credit register, and basically a lot of the complaints in relation to that. And the answer to your question is it hasn't gotten any worse.
Okay.
But it hasn't gotten any better. So,
okay. So maybe we need to reinforce some of the answers and share them again.
Yeah, it's we still have a steady stream of complaints in relation to both aspects, and it's to do with accuracy of data and keeping accurate data. And I understand, because I deal with many of the TPOs in the financial sector. This is a big project. This is something that they're working on quite a lot. It's something that they're not struggling with, but I mean, there is a lot of buy-in from senior management and from all the staff working within the financial sector to actually have accurate information in the customers. But it's a time process. It is a time-consuming process which requires constant updating, constant review, constant engagement with customers who may not be going, visiting regularly the office or the branch of a financial institution. So that you mightn't have that interaction with them. So it is something that the sector is very much aware of and very much attempting to try and change. But it's been very slow in basically happening.
Okay, well, we can certainly help in whatever way we can, just making sure that we keep it on people's radar. And you mentioned there about COVID, and just looking at maybe the impact on what COVID and how it has had on our operations, particularly focusing in from a data protection perspective. So, the world has obviously been through an awful lot since 12th of March 2020. That's the day a lot of Irish people went home and started working from home. And COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on the financial services sector and how it operates and how it will continue to operate. And by that, I mean, I suppose, the whole acceleration of the digitalisation programme, the fact that people are working remotely, the fact that, that's probably accelerated maybe some of the closures of, remote offices and all sorts of different things. So very much the online. I'm just wondering, as we see this acceleration and as we see employees working from home, and we even see this week, it's still unclear as to when that's going to stop, or if it'll probably never completely revert to normal. And we're all trying to work out what the future work looks like. What difficulties or problems have you seen arising, maybe in addition to what was already there, or has anything gone away, or what's your view on it from the Data Protection Commission?
Oh, well, on a positive note to start with, I mean, I think the financial sector has been one of the few sectors that actually was prepared for COVID, because, I mean, they have shown a resilience there. And actually, business has continued, and because of all the technologies, the financial sector is one of the core growth sectors for use of new technologies, with ATM cards. That was in its day innovation of a huge kind, and that you can go into any ATM machine in any country in the world nearly and get money out of it with an ATM card. So you do your pay and go in the shops for €50. That was a major thing that basically stopped the use of cash. You stopped the use spread of this pandemic disease through the exchanging cash. So cash has been reduced. The use of cash has been reduced greatly. It allowed online trading, so you can pay your bills online, you can pay you can do your shopping online, you can securely and safely. So the financial sector has been, without all the work that has been done by the sector to have all these things in place, we would have been in a much worse situation than we currently are in. Yeah. But I mean, to answer your question, working from home, is, we have not seen any significant complaints or security breaches to date from any organization in relation to any of their employees working from home. But that said, it's on the employee, and there is a responsibility on the employee to have a secure workplace within their home and within their household or wherever they are working. And if they are using confidential information, that basically it's not left lying around the place. If they are using a laptop computer or any other sort of computer, that basically there's no passcodes lying around the place, that nobody can steal the laptop, nobody can get access to it or download information from it. These are all things that, common sense things that people need to be, continue to be vigilant about, and actually, have a bit of respect for their employer's property and for the work that they're doing, and ensure that their information that they have remains confidential and that there is no breach to it, because a breach is very difficult to rectify.
Yeah, no, that's good advice, and I suppose it does come back to, I mean, it is the day-to-day stuff that we do that actually makes a difference, isn't it? It's doing everything right on the little things that that's where I suppose we stop the bigger things. And obviously, when you're working from home, I mean, I know there's a lot of vigilance out there, and there was as soon as people started working from home in the whole cyber area, and making sure that people were more vigilant. And but very much, yeah, back to the basic controls of just, I think most things are password protected now, but just making sure that things are safe and secure. And I think all employers, actually, in fairness, are working hard now with people in relation to work environments, and just making sure that they have safe, employees have safe places to work.
Just add to that, I mean, sorry, Evelyn, we've seen, and everybody's noticed this, the phishing attempts have increased astronomically, and especially in the financial sector, where it is very sophisticated, extremely sophisticated. And you see the Garrett Bureau of Fraud Investigation. I mean, the Chief Superintendent Pat Lorgan on the news there recently saying about a business that lost 180,000 basically through a phishing attempt. So, I mean, you have to be extremely wary of anything you're getting online, anything you're going into, anything that you get on the phone. That if it doesn't, if you didn't expect that to occur, then the chances are that it shouldn't have, be on your phone, or that message shouldn't have come to you, and you should be going into those links and or opening those attachments. So it's very, very important to be, vigilant about those sort of things.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. And I suppose people don't think it's something that'll happen then. So I suppose everybody just has to be really careful all the time. When we're talking about digitalisation, and I know internally here in IOB, we're developing programs in relation to fintech, and we're hearing about a lot of digitalisation and the disruption, and the digitalisation impact. What sort of impact is fintech having across data protection from what you're seeing?
It's having a huge impact. I mean, obviously, this is the EU Commission policy, digitalisation of the financial sector. They're doing a huge amount of work on it. They're bringing out new directives, new regulations in relation to use of artificial intelligence, use of blockchain, digital currency, probably digital euro at some stage. The ECB is doing a lot of work on that. They're doing a lot of work on AML. There's new regulations on that, which I'll talk about later. But the most recent work we've done is on the Payment Services Directive 2, which is basically allowing these disruptive technologies to be into place. And that's happened. There's all these new fintech companies that are actually, actually breaking data protection law, but rules, but actually on a legal basis, that they're allowed to do this. They're allowed to access somebody's account and actually get information from the account based on the consent of the account holder. So to date, it's worked out. We haven't seen that many complaints about it. We haven't had an investigation about it. But we've done a lot of guidance on it, and that was through the European Data Protection Board. We did a lot of work with the EU Commission and the relevant DG departments there, FISMA and ESMA, about how they expect that to be rolled out and how they expect it to operate in practice. So that guidance note is on the European Data Protection Board website. If everybody wants to see it, it's quite complicated. What's going on there? It's not a simple thing to explain in any sort of short dialogue, but it's one area that we are actually keep under a watchful eye on. I mean, we have engaged with the Central Bank of Ireland on this issue. We've engaged with the fintech operators, so we've had discussions with them. Any new processing operation that has been happening or is undergoing, the data protection requirement is that to do a data protection impact assessment, especially where it's processing a massive amount of personal data. And the personal data is the key thing. We have a big reservoir or reserve of data, and they want to use it for a different purpose, or they want to use it for different things. They need to do a DPIA. They need to be very transparent as to how they use that data. What algorithms are being used in AI. That's what these new laws from the EU Commission are coming across. They made the core responsibility on the controllers is that they're transparent. Again, another data protection requirement. is that explain what is actually happening, what the processing is occurring, what automated processing is occurring, and what benefit or harm could occur from such processing. And this is where your risk assessment comes into play, that you have to identify the harms that could occur and you have to mitigate against them. Again, another data protection requirement, especially when it involves personal data, that you're not doing something untoward to a person's, that could affect a person's, either in any way, imaginable. So, because the person,
two things come across there. One is that, like, it's really interesting how progressive the European Data Protection Board and the Data Protection Commission are being, in the sense that, the guidance being issued in real time when this is happening, as opposed to playing catch up. We know now, obviously, the developments are coming on, so that's really good to see. And then the other thing I think, from talking to you, listening to you there, is around the DPIAs, the data privacy impact assessments. I mean, they really do make you think when you're sort of, developing a new system and you take on the data, and then, naturally in an organization, somebody else will say, well, now we can do this. And you really do have to stand back and really question, why do we collect this data? What do we collect it for? And now what rights do we have to use it for, for other purposes? So I think that's really, it's made a lot of people think, much more deeply when they go to bring in new systems and do stuff than might have been the case before.
That's exactly it, yeah. I mean, accordingly, data protection doesn't prevent advancements, or it doesn't prevent you from working. It just asks you to do it in a logical. Yeah,
no, absolutely, yeah. And we see that because we see some of the big breaches that they come, and or not the breaches, but a lot of the enforcement that comes because of big organizations using data for maybe purposes that they didn't collect it for.
Yeah,
we see that. So we've touched on something before, and moving and obviously in IOB, a lot of our programs, and I said in the outset, in my own case, I look after governance and compliance programs. So from the world of compliance, one of the things I hear from compliance professionals a lot is, and we're covering it actually in one of the fintech programs that we're delivering, is that they can find within their organizations that they have a big conflict between managing for AML, anti-money laundering, financial crime, and data protection. And while they obviously are both under compliance, and with big organizations, and particularly financial services, they might have different areas looking for them. But is this something you're finding, that organizations, are they coming to you with those difficulties? And is there guidance from yourselves at the European Data Protection Board as to how to balance those two competing sort of requirements?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's, I also said everybody struggles with AML compliance. It's not just the private sector, it's the regulators as well. It's not a simple issue, especially with these new regulations coming online, which is basically is to harmonize a consistent approach across all the EU member states, where the EU Commission had found that some member states had very lax AML supervision, and some member states had over supervised their different obliged entities and designated bodies. So, it's, in a nutshell, AML is basically, there's two standards to it. Is A, is the collection of, the proper information, name, address, and, income, things like that, where you're getting your source of money. And the second one is that basically there's is where there's a red flag raised. There's a high risk element to what, there's something has happened in relation to the collection or processing of data that raises a red flag and needs enhanced due diligence. Now, that's the issue, where basically, you need to be ultra careful in relation to data protection issues, because you need to have a data minimization standard for what you're doing there. You can't tar everybody with the same brush in relation to doing this enhanced due diligence. And what I mean by that, you can't be profiling every individual customer on a daily basis, on the offset that there might be a high risk. It's based on, the whole purpose of AML is on financial transactions themselves. That basically is to stop criminal monies being laundered, and that's the core thing, or to stop money going to terrorist organizations or being, financing terrorist organizations. That is the core thing, and that should never be forgotten in relation to any AML compliance. So there is an enhanced due diligence approach there to actually, where these sort of red flag issues have been raised that need further investigation, and to see whether or not the matters shall be reported to the FIUs. So AML is going to be a very difficult issue in the next year or so, because there's going to be these new beneficial owner registers online, which are massive databases in relation to the company's company ownership and who owns companies, in relation to trusts, who owns the trusts, who are the beneficiaries of these trusts, in relation to other entities or corporate entities as well, corporate holdings that the Central Bank of Ireland will have a trust in that. So, how are access to these trusts managed is going to be a core significant thing, because obliged entities in certain cases will need to access information on a need-to-know basis that it is necessary for them to actually know whether or not they're onboarding a customer or company that is correct and not raising any red flag issues. So this is something that we're going to have to produce guidance on. It's something we have discussed with all the relevant parties, CBI, Department of Finance, and it's a matter that's ongoing, and we are all working on it to the point that we don't have anything yet, because a lot of things are undecided. There is an awful lot of loose ends from the EU Commission, who are basically rolling out these rules, yet they're not giving us the instruction manual to go with them. Okay, so it's very hard to give guidance on something when you don't have the proper instruction manual that basically that formulates why these rules are in existence in the first place. So I mean, some of the core issues we've actually raised with the European Commission directly from the European Data Protection Board is what we would have concerns about, and one of the big concerns is these access to these beneficial owner registers by anybody basically, including enforcement agencies. And secondly, there's something in the new regulations that says about special categories of data that you make, that designated or obliged entities can collect special categories of data, which includes race, health data, criminal convictions, things like that. But I mean, that's literally a one-liner. So in the law, there is no explanation as to why they would need to collect it or what purposes they need to collect this data for, which is an additional safeguard under GDPR that there needs to be consent to that. There needs to be a special purpose for that. It can't be just done on a need to know, just in case basis. So there is there needs to not.
Yeah, I know at an entity level, like on the AML side in particular, that there was a lot of work done between the guards and the central bank in ensuring that it wasn't just reporting. Like you had to have a basis for a transaction being a suspicious transaction. It had to be a genuine basis, not to just flag everything and sort of send them on, because like the guards weren't going to suddenly take them all and deal with them. So like there's lots of different levels, and certainly I suppose it's not helped by the fact that we have a lot of trusts as well in this country, maybe a bit more than.
We have a very different law system in relation to trusts. We're the common law system. Like, I mean, it was us in the UK. UK have left the EU, so it's just us now. I mean, and there's a huge amount of confidential information in those trusts. There's a lot of minors. There's a lot of people wards of court that these trusts are set up for. There's a lot of people, vulnerable people, that these trusts are set up for. So it's not just some sort of
as well as all our pension funds and everything else that are in them. So we have a huge amount compared to. I know that was a big issue at the time, back when this was started. So I suppose we're saying just we need to keep watching this space.
It is a work in progress. All I can say for the moment is that we are engaging with the European Commission through at the EDPB level. It's not just us; it's also the Department of Finance, the CBI. It's everybody. Everybody has a word saying about it. Everybody's raising the same concerns. They're all data protection concerns. They're all basic concerns. Is how is this going to work? And basically, because of it, if we don't have a clear blueprint as how this works in practice, then it's very unfair to the obliged entities and designated bodies that basically implement how they're going to.
I even had a case myself recently where I was collecting information on behalf of some of the of trustees and that various normal legal information you'd have to report on, but some of the information we were being asked to collect was maybe more personal than you'd like to actually have to ask somebody for. So you needed to sort of step out and put them in direct contact with the people that were looking for it, because you don't want to be collecting, just like that. You don't want to be holding that information. If you I'm careful not to use the word sensitive, because I'm not necessarily sensitive in the GDPR sense, but I mean still, any financial information or otherwise that people would consider sensitive if it was left out there for any reason. So no, we will watch that, and as things progress on that, that's something we might come back to you on if we want to talk more to the members and to compliance. So just talking again a little bit more about the compliance community. So we deliver and have developed and deliver programs with the Association of Compliance Officers. And, you know, in particular, we have delivered previous level 7 and currently deliver a really, really good level 9 program in relation to data protection, and which, you know, the successful graduates can take up their designation and then they keep their learning ongoing. Just, you know, how are you finding that role of the data protection officer within the organizations? How are you finding that role working? And I know it's probably 2 levels, because you have all those organizations that are required to appoint a DPO, but in reality, from what I've seen, a lot of organizations have a DPO, even if they're not required in the formal sense. How is that role worked out, and how supported is it within the organizations?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of organizations would have a lot of compliance officers, so which basically would have the data protection training. And what we're finding is, you know, because we deal with it on a regular basis through investigations or enforcement activity, whatever else for that matter, is that basically, you know, they have you need a good compliance officer, because you need a person that's able to actually deal with the subject access requests, which basically can, you know, if somebody's making a complaint to us, then basically they haven't had a proper service, you know, and this is where your compliance officer is essential to give that customer service, to explain why to a person in full, you know, why you're getting, you know, you're getting the information, or why some of it is redacted, or why some of it is left out, or why they haven't got all of it. They need that full explanation, okay? And this is where the complaint drags on with us, because they haven't given any explanation. They've left huge gaps in the thing, and that's where a good compliance officer would have sorted that out within the 30-day period. Yeah. And, you know, and would have kept that customer satisfied and not making a complaint. I mean, and, you know, because every annual report every year from DPC shows that this is a core issue. So that access rights are not being complied with. And the core reason why they're not being complied with is because the person who's dealing with it in the business end of things does not know what they're doing and is giving the wrong answers to the customer. So that's where your training is vital for those compliance officers to do their job properly. Secondly, I mean, it's not just access, it's any rights, basically, right of rectification. So if there's inaccurate data there, that basically a person has the right to have that data rectified. It's the right to object to automated processing or things that are occurring with their data, basically, so that can happen in any situation. But I mean, it's mainly for big technology, use of big technology. And basically, you know, so your compliance officer needs to know how to deal with these exercise of rights and how far they can go. They're not absolute rights, some of them. I mean, some of them are basically, there is a legal process there that, you know, to prevent fraud, or to prevent that there is certain information that doesn't have to be given out to a party because it's confidentially sensitive or commercially sensitive information as part of the organization's process. So I mean, there is derogations there, or, you know, exemptions in regard to under the Data Protection Act 2018 that do apply in relation to this. But this is where your compliance officer needs to know in their business model what does and does not, you know, is or is not an absolute right in relation to the work that they're doing. And we also say, like, compliance officers deal with a lot of breach reports. So I mean, if there's a security incident within the workplace, they need to have that emergency plan in place as to how they're going to deal with it and how they're going to rectify it, which is a massive undertaking. If there is a big breach, if there is a big security breach that lost a huge amount of data, then, you know, that is a huge cleanup exercise. And you know, a compliance officer needs to know how to deal with that and how they're going to actually you know, have the resources and time and, you know, and even the expert advice to actually fix something that may be an IT security issue, or putting the IT security safeguards in place. And finally, then, you know, I mean, the compliance officers, and you know, they overall they're great value and assistance to the management and structure of the organization in relation to, you know, their input for DPIAs. They're coming from special, you know, that they give an independent feedback on what they, you know, on the view that has occurred in the DPIA, the Data Protection Impact Assessment, as to what the intended form of processing is, and they can give that expert advice internally as to, you know, that could work, or that might work, or we have a problem with that and we need to mitigate it. So they can actually do this sort of internal assessment before it goes to us at all, and they actually sort of iron out all the problems and all the difficulties with a proposal before it comes to us, and actually have the issue sort of in a 90% there, sort of, just resign out, and which saves time, money, everything, so the value of a good compliance team, we've seen it time and time again. Their value is enormous because it keeps the business running, it keeps the flow going, it keeps the new proposals going, it keeps other sections happy, and other sections actually talk to each other because they're going through the compliance officer. Sections that never before dealt with each other actually have to, because they're dealing with data protection issues, have to talk to other sections and say how we deal with this. So we find it's been very positive.
And one of the things I've also seen, which I think is hugely important, you've mentioned now the DPIA a few times, but the fact that they compliance functions are ensuring that it gets started early in the process and it's not sort of retrofitted at the end, because like that's where you also have big problems. So, which leads me on to just something towards the end maybe, but leads me on to just the concept of culture and how culture impacts what we're looking at. So, I mean, we're seeing, we talk about culture across financial services in lots of different ways. And, we talk about changing the culture in organizations. And with COVID, we've also then talked about culture. But like, how important do you view the organization culture in the effective management of data in the organization? And are you seeing differences between organizations that say have maybe better cultures or developed better cultures than others?
Yeah, I mean, I deal with a lot of large banks, and the credit unions, and everybody in the financial sector, across the board. I mean, and the people that buy into data protection, who have grasped that its importance, are they have actually they have found the benefits from it huge. Enormous, I mean, it's better work practices, it's better resources, it's better time management, it's more effective customer service, it's more effective use of the information that they had in hand. I mean, most of the financial sector had a database that was neglected for decades, and basically have so much information on it that basically they didn't need. It was a liability to them. It had to be got they had to go into this massive spring clean exercise which has taken years to do, to actually delete, erase. I mean, this is an issues that they should have had ongoing for every day, but with their data protection unit and their data protection officer overseeing. But they only realize now, when before GDPR came in, hang on a sec, we need to have this in place. We need to have these processes in place, so everybody knows, is on the same page, knows what they're doing and why we're collecting this data, which contains personal data, what we're using it for, and how long do we need it for, and when do we get rid of it. So, I mean, this has sort of streamlined the business process in organizations, the way they think and the way they use new technologies to actually do that for them, and actually, in a constructive, positive manner that overall is cost effective and beneficial to the workforce as well, and ultimately to their customer. But I would say that the DPO, and I didn't mention it before in relation to compliance office, but many large organizations have a core DPO in place, and some of these people are exceptional in their work, and how they engage with senior management. What we find is the more seriously an organization takes the role of the DPO, the better the compliance that it has. Okay, so the DPO's role is independent in its nature, in that they have to do an objective assessment on what is the subjective matter. Basically, it's work that has been done for their employer. They have to give an objective opinion on it, and sometimes that objective opinion may be negative. And it's negative for a purpose, because it's basically an expert saying, we need to have a better look at this, because we're putting ourselves in serious risk here if we continue with the way we're going to do this, or the way we're going to process personal data, or collect personal data, or you further use personal data. We're going to have problems with this. So the DPO is vital. That voice there, that independent voice, is vital to any senior management organization, for them to listen to it and say, because they are identifying risks that have to be mitigated against. It's not just a rubber stamping exercise. If it's not done, there will be problems in the future. So, it's vital that senior management buy into the DPO function, understand what the function is. It's not there to stop or block anything, but it's an internal mechanism that allows an objective overview of how the organization's business is working and processing personal data and how it can be done better, but with the safeguards in place, with all the, that mitigates against any liability or any risk. And, failure to do that is, failure to listen to a DPO is very stupid in my opinion, because you're just, what I've seen is basically, it's not, you've seen in public, in newspapers there recently, we have issued quite a lot of big fines. There are administrative fines and hundreds of millions against some multinational companies. But I mean, it's not the fine that actually, which is, a massive amount of money in the first place, but it's not the fine that actually will break an organization. It's actually the rectification process for rectifying a breach or basically deletion of data that has been incorrectly collected. That is an undertaking that is huge, which will cost more than any administrative fine, because it takes years to do, it takes huge manpower, it takes a lot of resources that could be used in doing your business better, rather than actually cleaning up a massive mess, which is going to cost a fortune to clean up. So if you don't listen to the DPO, if you don't take on board those issues, you are leaving yourself wide open to a potential, problem down the line. Which could occur from an investigation from our office or from a security breach that basically reveals all the problems that systemic problems that should have been dealt with a long time ago.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good insight, and I think what we see with the data protection officers, or certainly the senior data protection personnel that are coming through and professionals that are coming through in our programs, is that they're just another senior element of the organization that helps an organization run effectively and efficiently. And as you say, obviously meeting its regulatory requirements, but it's the risk of not doing that. And I mean, many organizations have had to work so hard and are still working hard to be fully GDPR compliant. Not in the initial ways, I suppose. I think everybody recognizes now about how to collect data and, that, but like the retention and the deletion and all the policies and the records management and everything, it's certainly, it's just a whole other layer.
It's an enormous undertaking. I mean, I've met several organizations, and some have done a superb job, but the work that they put into it was just humongous. Yeah. It's there. They have the blueprint, they have the plan. All they have to do is follow it now. It's work that's actually achieving something very positive and and it'll stand the test of time. So I mean, it's well worth it. I mean, the organizations that I have been very impressed with, some very, very big organizations that done this and done a superb job on it. So
it hopefully makes your life a bit easier as well.
It does, yeah.
Garrett, that's been a brilliant conversation. Just, I suppose, to give you the last few words, in the sense that, like, what are your priorities over the next months and year ahead, and where do you see sort of you being the busiest?
AML is the priority. So it's just a mess. I mean that in the nicest way possible, but I mean, there is a lot of guidance needed for that. So and unfortunately, it's not just going to come from us; it has to come from other organisations as well. So it's not just a data protection issue, but I mean, it's a lot of other organisations have to get involved as well.
Well, I would love to, when the time is right, we might pick this conversation back up again and see, what are the issues arising. But for now, listen, thank you so much for joining me today, and thanks for everybody for listening. Thank you.